That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, let's go through. Let's talk about some of these waiver wire options for week 9. Now, we have a couple running backs that I really think you can actually pick up and possibly just start right away. I think they can be great options for you. But to be honest, I mean, I think looking at the waiver wire this week, in terms of running backs versus wide receiver, quarterback, I mean, even tight end, I think there's so much value to be found at the other positions at the same time that I think that we're just going to throw everything on this one video. We're going to talk about some running backs at the very beginning, but then afterwards, I think we want to get to some other positions here. But of course, before we do that, make sure you go down there, drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and go down there and leave a comment with any questions you may have, or really with anything. We're about to give away some Fantasy Vlog Network hats. Let me go through and find some random comments to go and give these hats away from. Now, our first one going to be coming out from Venture, who says, I'm down 6 with Kadarius Toney. If he plays, do I take the dub? Hell yes. We've told so many people to play Kadarius Toney. I really hope he at least scores 6 points. And now, Browns fan coming out says, Joe Mixon believer right here. Help me to start 6-2. Congrats on the fantastic start, my friend. And congrats on the Fantasy Vlog Network hat. If you ever win a Fantasy Vlog Network hat, just make sure you send me that email with your address ASAP so I can get that out. And another announcement, we will have our rest of season rankings updated on Patreon tomorrow on Tuesday. I want to make sure that we have time to just let Sunday digest. And I mean, we can also watch this Monday night game between the Kansas City Chiefs and the New York Giants before we make any decisions in regarding of our rest of season rankings. So of course you can find those rankings over there on Patreon. When you join Patreon as well, you can get a Fantasy Vlog Network hat, an in-depth podcast breaking down your fantasy football team. Those rankings are dynasty rankings. Get in a dynasty league with us this offseason. I mean, there's so much stuff going on over there on Patreon. Also our group chat. But let's go through. Let's just dive into these running backs here. Obviously, we're going to start it off with the backfield everybody will be talking about. Let's go over to Philadelphia. Let's talk about some Boston Scott. And y'all know, I mean, we kind of hit the nail on the head with this Kenneth Gainwell situation last week where we got so many questions. Mason, am I going with Gainwell? Am I going Elijah Mitchell? Mason, are we going Gainwell? Are we going to go Zach Moss? We pretty much went with the opposite answer of Kenneth Gainwell every single time, saying that Gainwell definitely had the upside. Last week, I was wanting to make the bet on Kenneth Gainwell to be the lead running back in Philadelphia, but we weren't confident enough with Kenneth Gainwell to go out there and say that he was someone you needed in your starting lineup. Rather, we needed to wait a week. We needed to see what the actual workload was going to be, because obviously it's going to be a completely different situation when the Philadelphia Eagles have all week to prepare for a running back room that does not have Miles Sanders. So we needed to see the workload for Boston Scott. We needed to see the workload for Jordan Howard, and we needed to see the workload for Kenneth Gainwell. Now, with all this being said, I mean, Boston Scott comes out, dominates this week, but I'm not just going to be coming out and saying, okay, Boston Scott's the guy, jam him in your starting lineup every single week going forward, because it's going to be a tough position when this game was just so out of hand between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Detroit Lions. You actually had the Philadelphia Eagles winning this contest 44-6. And I mean, at halftime, this game was 17-0. Then, through 3 quarters, this game was 38-0. So it's really hard to look at the exact snap data that we have here with all 3 of these running backs. I mean, the exact touches breakdown, because when the game's going to be 38-0 going into the 4th quarter, I don't necessarily think that the Philadelphia Eagles are going, okay, we need points. Let's give Philly fans exactly what they need. Let's put our best running backs out there in the roles that they're going to have going forward. That's not the case. I mean, they're just kind of getting to the end of this game. I mean, with all this being said, Boston Scott does lead this backfield with 29 snaps compared to Kenneth Gainwell getting 20, compared to Jordan Howard getting 16. With Boston Scott, he runs the most targets out of this backfield. This is what kind of tells us that Scott was the running back at the very beginning of the game. Also, he's the one that scored that touchdown at the beginning. But nonetheless, you kind of see that whenever it was still a neutral situation and they weren't just completely abandoning the pass to just run the ball over and over again in the second half, that Boston Scott was in this game. He was their lead running back. I mean, he did end up getting only 1 target out of the backfield. Now, in reference to Boston Scott, I don't want to be overreacting to the fact that he only had 1 target here, because while yes, that doesn't necessarily make it seem like he had a massive role in this offense, at the same time, you need to view this game as something that we're probably not going to be getting going forward, Because if you're looking at Philadelphia, Jalen Hurts had 9 completions. 9 completions. So if you're getting 1 target out of the backfield, it's not like you're even that bad at the running back position with your usage in the receiving game. If anything, I probably prefer to just look at the routes that he's running, and he ran 9 routes compared to the combination of Kenneth Gainwell and Jordan Howard running 8 total routes out of this backfield. Now, Boston Scott also comes away with the fantasy points. Of course, this is what everybody else is going to be looking at. He comes away with 60 rushing yards. More importantly, he does have 2 rushing touchdowns. So we're picking up Boston Scott not as a plug-and-play option right away, rather as an option that we saw be the starting running back in Philadelphia. Now, what we need to see this next week against the Chargers, which will most likely be a much closer contest than you had against the Detroit Lions, is I want to see the usage with Jordan Howard, because we know that Kenneth Gainwell is going to have a role in this offense regardless, but I actually think that if Boston Scott is coming out playing the Miles Sanders role and Kenneth Gainwell is playing his usual role that he saw at the beginning of the season, going forward until Miles Sanders comes back, we may be able to be starting Boston Scott in fantasy. Now, we can't just jam him in automatically in week 9, however, because we don't know if Jordan Howard is going to be vulturing away some of the touchdowns at the goal line. Jordan Howard did have 2 touchdowns this past week. And if Howard's really getting any work in this backfield, I know it's kind of tough to say this after a week where, I mean, if you're looking at the total carries for Philadelphia, this is an offense that had almost 50 carries compared to 9 completions for Jalen Hurts. So everything is skewed here. But the scenario that we can end up starting Boston Scott in fantasy is he plugs and plays into that Miles Sanders role this next week. We have Kenneth Gainwell in his usual role, and Jordan Howard doesn't see usage if this game's close. So with that scenario, I think it would make Boston Scott almost a must-start running back going in to week 10. But definitely need to be monitoring what we have in week 9 before we decide to just go through jam Boston Scott into our starting lineup. But we have to pick him up. And our next running back, someone that we possibly can actually just play right away, is going to be Carlos Hyde. Of course, if you're looking at the fantasy production for Carlos Hyde, I mean, it wasn't the best. He does come out, however, and he's a mid, low-end running back too. He has 9 carries, 32 rushing yards, which very bad. You're not excited about that at all. But what is unbelievably surprising with Carlos Hyde here, 8 targets out of the backfield, 6 receptions, 40 receiving yards. I mean, just adding on 10 fantasy points as a receiver. I mean, that's something I would have never expected with Carlos Hyde, even with the injury to James Robinson. So if you have the injury to James Robinson going forward, I mean, the next few weeks, not the best matchups for the Jacksonville Jaguars. So this week against the Buffalo Bills, we're probably going to be starting anybody other than Carlos Hyde. But right now, we don't have the clarity on how long this James Robinson injury is going to linger. I think just picking up another starting running back free from the waiver wire, probably a pretty good idea, especially if Carlos Hyde, we know he's going to get usage in the receiving game. And on top of this, apparently, he's going to get usage in the red zone. So if he's getting those 2 things, I mean, definitely a player that you could look to start. Now, let's go over to Mark Ingram. I want to bring up Ingram just for a little bit, and that you're going to be looking at Mark Ingram as a running back that you probably should be picking up just as a desperation play. I mean, if Alvin Kamara were to go down, I think you could start Mark Ingram in this New Orleans Saints offense, but if Kamara plays, we're going to be benching Mark Ingram. You're just picking him up because now he is in that handcuff range for one of the better offenses in the NFL. But now let's go over to the quarterback position really quick, and let's go to a quarterback that y'all know we have said a lot of bad things about for pretty much the past, I want to say 10 months or so, including dynasty leagues. Let's go over to Justin Fields. Now, Justin Fields comes out with no Matt Nagy this week against the 49ers. Apparently, that's what you needed to unlock Justin Fields, and then he sees 27 fantasy points. He has more fantasy points this week than he did essentially the combined first month of the season. Of course, you had Andy Dalton starting for a week and a half out of that month, but still, I mean, you have like more production this week than Justin Fields has had in a span of 3 weeks of him actually starting and playing entire games for the Chicago Bears. He has 103 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. Now that is 16 points just based off of what you're getting in the rushing department. Now we always talk about this, but in a 4-point passing touchdown format, that is unbelievable with just the amount you're adding on to the passing game. 16 points just in the rushing category is equivalent to 400 passing yards. 400 passing yards just added on to Justin Fields. He didn't look that great as a passer. I mean, he did get 175 passing yards, a passing touchdown. So you're not that excited about Allen Robinson, not that excited about Darnell Mooney here. However, I mean, with Justin Fields, if all of a sudden Matt Nagy comes in and goes, you know what? I was being stupid. We are trying to get Justin Fields to run an Andy Dalton type offense. Why don't we just build an offense for Justin Fields, or at least let him do his thing? And I can kind of take a back seat. If Matt Nagy is smart enough to do that, and we get Justin Fields scrambling and picking up these rushing yards again going forward, I don't want to say he is a quarterback one, but I mean, he's definitely worth being on your roster. Like right now, say you're rostering the combination of Matt Ryan, Derek Carr, and you're playing the matchup with those two quarterbacks. I would definitely rather play the matchups with like Derek Carr, Justin Fields than Derek Carr, Matt Ryan. Now let's go over to another rushing quarterback that we don't have any stats on this week, but James Winston just went down. So let's go over to Taysom Hill. And with Taysom Hill, I mean, this is an option that, of course, everybody remembers 2020 when you got that one single week where he was listed as a tight end and everybody got to take advantage of that dependent on the platform that you were playing on. But with Taysom Hill, the big thing to look at is the fact that he is going to be that Konami code quarterback. He is going to be the option picking up rushing yards in this offense. If we're going to go through and look at when he was the starting quarterback for that duration of time in 2020, let's go through. Let's look at the rushing yardage here in that 1 month that he had. He played in week 11, week 12, week 13, and week 14. And no, Taysom Hill is not some elite level real life NFL quarterback, but just as we discussed with Jalen Hurts coming into the season, these rushing quarterbacks, they don't have to be good real life NFL quarterbacks to be great fantasy ones. And based on that 4-week stretch of 50 rushing yards, 44 rushing yards, 83 rushing yards, and 33 rushing yards, you actually have Taysom Hill dropping 26 fantasy points, 19.5, 25.5, 23 fantasy points in being a quarterback one in fantasy. Now, with Taysom Hill going forward, I mean, obviously we need him to come back from that concussion, but I'd imagine that he is going to. And hell yes, Taysom Hill going up against the Atlanta Falcons in week 9. Hopefully we get Michael Thomas back in this New Orleans Saints offense sometime soon. At the time of this recording, I'm recording this Sunday night, so we don't have an official report on the injury to Jameis Winston, but you don't need a long-term injury as long as you're going to get a small window for Taysom Hill to be that starter. Now let's go over to a wide receiver that we talked a lot about coming into the week, not putting him in your starting lineup. I don't want to act like we were telling anybody to start him, but we were talking about him impacting other players in this offense. Let's go over to Devonta Parker here. Now, y'all know with Parker, I mean, this is a wide receiver that we were saying, oh, he's going to impact Jalen Waddle. Jalen Waddle not nearly as intriguing this week with Devonta Parker being good to go in Miami. That kind of comes true. I mean, if you're going to be looking at the workload that you add for Devonta Parker, I mean, he actually plays 63 snaps. Really funny that you essentially only get snaps for Jalen Waddle and Devonta Parker. I mean, this team ran a lot of 12 personnel. They ran a lot of 2 tight end sets. Mike Gesicki, 66 snaps. Adam Shaheen, 41. Durham Smythe, 29 snaps. Whereas, I mean, Jalen Waddle, Devonta Parker, the only wide receivers on this offense to see double-digit snaps. You get 12 targets for Parker, 10 targets for Jalen Waddle. And with Parker, definitely the more productive wide receiver overall in a tough matchup against the Buffalo Bills. He actually comes out. He is a mid to low end wide receiver 2 this week. And with Devonta Parker, he has 11 targets, 8 receptions, 85 receiving yards as a 6'3" massive wide receiver that you know the touchdown upside will be there as well. His next matchup is against the Houston Texans. So I think clearly Devonta Parker is a must-add wide receiver. I mean, back in 2019, once you had the injury to Preston Williams, you actually had Devonta Parker in the second half of the season, finishing as the wide receiver 2. For anybody who remembers that greatness from the Devonta Parker we got from half a season, obviously back in that 2015 draft class, a lot of people were excited about Devonta Parker and his elite college prospect profile coming out of Louisville. This is a player that definitely has the potential. I mean, it looks like he's probably been putting it together and has the talent over the past few years. We just need the situation to be right. Now let's go over to our next wide receiver. We're going to briefly speak on him just because, I mean, for some reason, he is still available in a ton of leagues, even though I don't really understand why. Let's talk about Rashad Bateman here. I mean, with Rashad Bateman, let's just hammer it back in. I mean, Bateman looked very good in the 2 limited weeks that we had to see from him. Of course, it's a very small sample. Of course, it's hard to judge too much just from those 2 weeks that we had from the rookie wide receiver. But coming out of the bye, we're going to imagine that Rashad Bateman will be even healthier from that groin injury going forward. This is someone that the volume's been there in Baltimore. He's had 6 targets back-to-back weeks. Back in week 7, he actually had 3 receptions and 80 receiving yards. So I don't want to spend too much time on him. I will say, as a quick asterisk here, I actually think you have to be a little pessimistic about Hollywood Brown, Rashad Bateman, and Mark Andrews in regards of Sammy Watkins coming back into this offense. But I mean, that's in regards of putting them in your starting lineup. For now, you definitely have to pick up Bateman. Also knowing that, I mean, Hollywood Brown is a wide receiver that's dealt with injuries before. I mean, if he were to miss time, Bateman becomes easily a top 20 option, no question. Now let's go over to the tight end position. Actually, let me give one more caveat on here. If for whatever reason Michael Gallup is available on your waiver wire, go pick up Michael Gallup. I know it's probably a long shot, but I just want to be hitting these players briefly just so you can go through and double check. With Gallup, this is a wide receiver that I'm not saying he is nearly as talented. You know, I am the world's #1 Amari Cooper fan. We used to have that old Raiders Amari Cooper jersey in our studio. I mean, I love me some Amari Cooper. You don't have to tell me how solid he is, but I want to point out that back in 2019, Michael Gallup had more targets on a per game basis and more receiving yards on a per game basis than Amari Cooper. I mean, not to say that he's a better wide receiver, but it's more so to put into context how great Michael Gallup truly is. So yeah, definitely go through and try to jam in Michael Gallup. I mean, if you're getting him for free off the waiver wire, that's going to be no brainer. Now let's go over to the tight end position. Let's go over to Pat Freiermuth, someone that we told y'all to pick up last week. He comes out, has yet another week with no Eric Ebron here. Of course, once Ebron is back in Pittsburgh, you're probably going to be less excited about playing him. But in this game where the Pittsburgh Steelers had a difficult time moving the ball down the field, I mean, he still had a great game. He had 7 targets, just like he did in week 6. He came away with double-digit fantasy points, which is all you can really ask for from a tight end. He has 4 receptions, 44 receiving yards, and the receiving touchdown to go along with it. I see no reason for this Pittsburgh Steelers team to rush Eric Ebron back anytime soon, given the usage that you're getting from Pat Freiermuth, leading to a lot of production here. Clearly, he has been an efficient player when he's on the field for the Pittsburgh Steelers. We know that he's a great blocking tight end at the same time. So maybe if, even when Ebron comes back, I mean, maybe you're not going to go through and just jam Freiermuth into your starting lineup, but still, we can at least keep him on the bench, kind of see what the snaps are going to be looking like between these 2 tight ends, because we know that rookie tight ends, they're never supposed to get on the field. They're never supposed to produce year 1, despite what they look like as prospects coming to the NFL. So when they do, we have to take notice, especially when you're succeeding at the level that Pat Freiermuth is. So maybe this Pittsburgh Steelers team decides to continue to expand his role in the second half of the season and kind of diminish what we're getting from Eric Ebron, especially knowing that Eric Ebron's not in the long-term plans if you're looking at the contract for Ebron for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Pat Freiermuth, another pickup. And our last pickup that we're going to be talking about at the tight end position will be Logan Thomas. And here with Logan Thomas, obviously he's going to be rostered in pretty much any league that you were able to just easily move him down to the waiver wire. But a lot of people are playing in leagues where maybe you only have one waiver wire spot. And not sure if you've heard, but we have Christian McCaffrey, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, David Montgomery, Miles Sanders. I mean, so many players hitting that IR that I know a lot of people were in a position that it's either, okay, can I get my favorite waiver wire pickup of the week, or am I going to just have to hold on to Logan Thomas on our bench for the next 3 to 4? And people didn't really want to hold on to Logan Thomas, so he is currently available in some leagues. And with Thomas, he's just going to go through, play that Ricky Seals-Jones, yet he's just going to be a better version of Ricky Seals-Jones. And that workload has been great for RSJ since you had the injury to Logan Thomas. I mean, you've had 9 targets, 6 targets, 7 targets, 4 targets. So essentially over the past month, you've had RSJ averaging about 7 targets a game, which is exactly what you're looking for from a tight end. Logan Thomas is a significantly better tight end overall than what you actually have with Ricky Seals-Jones. We don't really know what we're going to be getting from Curtis Samuel anytime soon. So go pick up Logan Thomas if for whatever reason someone in your league dropped him. But yeah, that's all I got for you. If you have not already, please go down there, drop that like on the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell next to the subscribe button so you can come out to our live streams. We live stream every single night. We have not missed a live stream in over 100 days. So definitely please make sure you subscribe. And then also go consider joining the flock on Patreon to support the channel over there on Patreon. I mean, once you join, you get your Fantasy Flock Network hat. You get a podcast breaking down your fantasy team. You get our rest of season rankings. You get our dynasty rankings. You can get in a dynasty league with us. You can get in a regular 2022 fantasy league with us. And I mean, you get in our group chat. There's so much over there on Patreon. Make sure you consider joining. You can find that link in the description of the video. And that's all I got for you. Thank you so much. And I hope to see y'all with the video, or I mean, how about I'll see you in the live stream tonight.